The police sirens screamed so loudly that Grace's heart almost stopped. Just 5 minutes ago, she was standing peacefully at the bus stop, holding a heavy black travel bag for her best friend. Now, flashing lights stopped right in front of her, and 2 officers stepped out, their eyes fixed directly on her like she was the only person in the world. Grace's fingers tightened around the handle. Her mouth became dry. In that moment, a terrible question entered her mind. Why did Sandra leave so fast? Everything had happened too quickly. Sandra had looked nervous, her hands shaking, sweat on her forehead, her smile weak and forced. She begged Grace to hold the bag for just 2 minutes. Grace trusted her. Sandra was not just a friend. She was like a sister. But when Grace turned her head for 1 second, Sandra disappeared into the crowd like she never existed. Grace called her name, but Sandra did not stop. She did not turn back. She did not care. Now the police were here. One officer stepped closer and looked at the bag. His voice was calm, but serious. He asked Grace who owned it. Grace tried to explain, her voice weak and shaking. She told them it belonged to her friend, that she was only helping. But her words sounded small, even to herself. The officer stretched his hand and told her to give him the bag. Grace hesitated, fear running through her body like cold water. She slowly handed it over. When the officer opened the zip, everything changed. Inside the bag were bundles of money, thick bundles. More money than Grace had ever seen in her life. The officer's expression hardened instantly. The second officer looked at her with suspicion, his eyes sharp and cold. Grace's legs felt weak. She shook her head quickly, tears forming in her eyes. She tried to explain again. She told them it was not hers. She told them Sandra gave it to her. She pointed down the road, but Sandra was gone. The officer asked her to call Sandra. Grace's hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She dialed Sandra's number. It rang once, twice, then it stopped. She tried again. This time, the phone was switched off. Grace stared at the screen in disbelief. Her heart broke in that moment, not because of the police, but because Sandra had abandoned her. The officer told her to step into the vehicle. Grace felt the world collapsing around her. People at the bus stop were watching her like she was a criminal. Their whispers cut into her like knives. Nobody spoke for her. Nobody defended her. And the only person who could save her was gone. At the police station, Grace sat on a cold bench, her hands shaking, her eyes full of tears. She tried to stay calm, but fear controlled her body. The officers asked her questions. They asked about the bag. They asked about the money. Grace told them the truth, again and again. She said she did not know. She said Sandra gave it to her. But without proof, her words felt useless. Then, suddenly, the door opened. Grace's heart filled with hope. Relief washed over her like rain after drought. She stood up quickly, tears in her eyes ready to be saved. She believed Sandra would tell the truth. She believed Sandra would protect her. But Sandra's face was calm. Too calm. The officer asked Sandra if she knew Grace. Sandra nodded slowly. Grace waited, her heart beating fast. She expected Sandra to explain everything. She expected her friend to end the nightmare. Instead, Sandra said something that destroyed Grace completely. She said the bag was not hers. Grace froze. Her mind refused to accept what she just heard. Her body became cold. Her voice broke as she begged Sandra to tell the truth. She reminded her of the bus stop. She reminded her of the bag. She reminded her of their friendship. But Sandra looked at her like she was nothing, like she was a stranger. In that moment, Grace realized something painful. The person she trusted most had just betrayed her. Grace stood frozen in the middle of the police station, her tears falling without control. Her ears rang loudly, and Sandra's words repeated in her mind again and again. That bag is not mine. Each time Grace remembered it, her heart broke deeper. She stared at Sandra, hoping she would change her words, hoping she would laugh and say it was all a mistake. But Sandra remained calm, her face innocent, her eyes empty of guilt. Grace's voice trembled. She begged Sandra to remember the truth. She reminded her how she held her wrist tightly at the bus stop. She reminded her how she whispered in her ear. She reminded her how she begged her to hold the bag. But Sandra only shook her head slowly, acting confused, acting hurt, acting like Grace was the one lying. The officers watched both of them carefully. One officer asked Grace if she had any proof. That question hit her like a stone. Proof. How do you prove betrayal? How do you prove that someone you trusted destroyed you? Grace's hands shook as she tried to think. Then suddenly, a small hope appeared in her mind. She whispered one word: CCTV. The officers looked at her. Grace explained quickly. She told them there were cameras at the bus stop. She told them the cameras would show everything. She told them the cameras would show Sandra giving her the bag. For the first time since her arrest, Grace felt a small light inside her chest. One officer nodded and left the room to request the footage. Sandra's face remained calm, but Grace noticed something small. For 1 second, Sandra's eyes moved nervously. It was quick, almost invisible, but Grace saw it. And that 1 second gave her hope. Still, the officers told Grace she would remain in custody until they confirmed the truth. Those words broke her again. She sat alone in the small holding room, her back against the cold wall. The room smelled old and empty. Grace hugged herself tightly, trying to stop her body from shaking. Her mind replayed everything: the bus stop, the bag, Sandra's voice, Sandra's face. She remembered how their friendship started. 3 months earlier, Grace had met Sandra at a training program. Grace was quiet and simple. She never liked attention. She believed in hard work and peace. Sandra was different. Sandra was loud, confident, and beautiful. She entered rooms like she owned them. She wore expensive clothes and spoke like she feared nothing. Sandra was the one who first spoke to Grace. She smiled warmly and told Grace to sit beside her. She called Grace my sister. She made Grace feel special. Grace trusted her easily because Grace had a soft heart. She believed kindness was real. Soon, they became very close. Sandra called her every day. They ate together, they laughed together. Sandra told Grace everything, or at least everything she wanted Grace to know. Grace never doubted her. She never imagined Sandra could lie. Then, one day, they met Daniel. It happened at a small cafe near their training center. Sandra noticed him first. She joked about him, calling him husband material. Grace laughed, not thinking much of it. But when Daniel came closer, something unexpected happened. He looked at Grace, not Sandra. He spoke politely, his voice calm and respectful. He asked Grace questions. He noticed Grace. Sandra laughed loudly, trying to pull his attention, but Daniel's eyes always returned to Grace. From that day, everything began to change. Daniel started talking to Grace more. He respected her. He cared about her feelings. He made her feel safe. Grace was not trying to steal anyone. She was just being herself. But Sandra noticed everything. She smiled on the outside, but inside, something dark was growing. One night, Sandra warned Grace jokingly, but her eyes were serious. She told Grace not to accept Daniel if he asked her out. Grace felt uncomfortable, but she didn't understand why Sandra was acting that way. Days later, Daniel asked Grace for her number. Grace hesitated because she didn't want to hurt Sandra. But Daniel was honest. He told her he liked her calm nature. He told her he liked her heart. Grace said yes. When she told Sandra, Sandra smiled and congratulated her. She hugged her tightly and said she was happy for her. But that night, Sandra did not sleep. She lay awake, staring into darkness, her mind full of jealousy. From that moment, Sandra stopped being just a friend. She became something else, something dangerous. And Grace never saw it coming. Grace sat alone in the cold holding room, her eyes swollen from crying, her heart heavy with pain she never imagined she would feel. The silence around her was loud, filled with fear and questions she could not answer. The person she trusted most had become the person destroying her life. And the worst part was not the police, not the accusations, not even the bag full of money. The worst part was Sandra's face, calm, cold, like Grace meant nothing. But Grace didn't know that Sandra's betrayal had started long before that morning. After Grace and Daniel became closer, Sandra slowly began to change. At first, it was small things. She stopped calling Grace as often. Her laughter felt forced. Her smiles looked fake. But Grace ignored it. She believed friendships had ups and downs. She never imagined Sandra was hiding something dark. Sandra, however, was fighting a battle inside herself. She could not understand why Grace was always chosen. Grace was quiet. Grace was simple. Grace never tried to impress anyone. Yet people loved her. Daniel loved her. And that burned Sandra's heart like fire. Sandra wanted attention. She wanted power. She wanted to be the one people admired. And slowly, jealousy turned into hatred. Sandra began living a secret life. She started spending time with a rich older man. He bought her expensive gifts, new clothes, expensive bags, and gave her money. Sandra loved the luxury, but she loved something else more: the feeling of control. She pretended everything came from hard work and luck. Grace believed her, because Grace never suspected evil in someone she loved. But Sandra's heart was already poisoned. One night, Sandra was inside a luxury hotel room with the rich man. He trusted her. He believed she cared about him. But Sandra only cared about one thing: opportunity. That night, she saw the travel bag. It was large, black, and full. When she opened it slightly, her breath stopped. Money. Bundles and bundles of money. More money than she had ever seen in her life. Her heart began to race fast. Her hands trembled. Her mind filled with dangerous thoughts. At first, she was scared. But then, another thought came. Grace. Grace's smiling face appeared in her mind. Grace's peaceful life. Grace's relationship with Daniel. Grace's happiness. Sandra's fear slowly turned into a dark plan. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to destroy Grace. Sandra waited until the man became weak and sleepy. She secretly added something to his drink to make him sleep deeper. Not to kill him, but to make sure he would not wake up soon. When he slept, Sandra moved quickly. She packed the bag completely. She wiped everything she touched. She wore gloves to avoid leaving evidence. Her heart beat loudly, but her mind was focused. When she left the hotel, the cold night air hit her face. Reality hit her too. This was dangerous. This could destroy her life forever. And then she thought of the perfect solution. Grace, in Sandra's mind, Grace was perfect, innocent, trusted, clean. No one would suspect Sandra if Grace was blamed. Sandra smiled slowly. Her plan was ready. The next morning, Sandra practiced her acting. She practiced looking scared. She practiced begging. She practiced lying. Then she met Grace at the bus stop. She pretended to be nervous. She begged Grace to hold the bag. She made Grace believe she would return. And then she disappeared. She left Grace standing alone with the bag, exactly as she planned. Now, back at the police station, Sandra stood outside the holding room. She watched quietly as Grace cried inside. Sandra felt no guilt, no regret, only satisfaction. She believed she had won. She believed Grace's life was finished. She believed Daniel would leave Grace. She believed Grace would lose everything. But Sandra didn't know something important. Daniel was not weak. When Daniel heard Grace was arrested, he didn't believe the accusations. He didn't believe the lies. His heart refused to accept it, because he knew Grace. He knew her truth. And at that very moment, Daniel was already on his way to the police station. Sandra thought her plan was perfect, but she didn't know the storm that was coming. And that storm had a name: Daniel. The moment Daniel entered the police station, the air seemed to change. Grace's sobs quieted slightly when she saw him. His calm presence was like an anchor in a raging storm. He went straight to her, holding her hands tightly. "It's okay, Grace. I'm here," he whispered. She clung to him as if letting go would mean falling into an endless pit. Sandra sat outside the office, pretending innocence, but Daniel's eyes could see through the act. He had noticed her small flickers of panic, the hesitation when CCTV and serial numbers were mentioned. He knew something was off, and now he was determined to uncover the truth. Inside the interrogation room, the officers finally presented the CCTV footage from the bus stop. The video showed Sandra handing the black travel bag to Grace and signaling her to look away. Every detail was clear: the deliberate act, the manipulation, the escape. The room went silent as the officers paused the footage. Sandra's calm facade crumbled. Her lips trembled, her eyes widened, and for the first time, fear replaced the satisfaction in her heart. Grace's tears flowed. But this time, they weren't only for fear. They were for betrayal, heartbreak, and relief that the truth was finally emerging. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, cold, yet controlled. "Sandra, you didn't just betray Grace. You tried to destroy her life, and you tried to play with the family name. But it ends here." The door opened and the senator walked in. Daniel's father, a powerful man whose presence could silence the entire station. He had seen the evidence and was personally invested. His gaze swept across Sandra, the black bag, and finally rested on Grace. "My son loves you," he said gently to Grace. "And I know you are not a criminal." Sandra froze. She had underestimated the consequences. She hadn't just targeted Grace. She had targeted the daughter-in-law of one of the most influential men in the country. Panic consumed her. The officers confirmed everything. The serial numbers on the bundles, the CCTV footage, and witness accounts. Every lie Sandra had crafted fell apart under the weight of proof. Grace, finally safe, looked at Sandra not with hatred, but with clarity. "This ends now," she said softly. "I trusted you, and you chose to betray me. That choice is yours to live with." As Sandra was led away, screaming threats and apologies alike, Grace felt a strange relief. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't triumph, it was truth. Her name was cleared, her life reclaimed, and she finally understood the value of loyalty and the cost of deception. Daniel held her close. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I will never let anyone harm you again." Grace nodded, tears still falling, but a weight had lifted from her chest. Outside the station, the city moved on, unaware of the storm that had passed within those walls. But inside, a lesson had been learned. Betrayal can wear a friendly face, but truth always finds its way. And as Grace and Daniel walked out hand in hand, the black travel bag remained, a silent witness to deception, greed, and ultimately, justice. The chapter ended with one thought lingering in the air. Trust is fragile, but truth is unstoppable.